Good afternoon. I'm Alexandra Kritina, journalist of Kyiv Post. Today with us Mark Savchuk. He's the head of Supervisory Council of Anti-Corruption Agency. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Nice to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for asking.
My first question, I think everyone interested in, it's about recent corruption scandal in the Ministry of Defense. A lot of officials resigned, including the deputy minister. I would like to ask, is anti-corruption agency carrying out investigations about?
Yes, they do. When the corruption scandal started, the minister actually was very active in communicating what was happening inside the ministry. So we have actually several law enforcement agencies conducting investigations within the ministry, and as you know, have several.
How many investigations?
A lot. No, obviously not that. But still, so the minister said to the parliament members that they can assemble, if they wish, a working group that will, a special task force that will look into every single document that Ministry of Defense has. And he obviously shares these documents with law enforcement agencies. And right now, there are several investigations that are active, and we have to give them a bit of time in order to come up with some actual conclusions. But the scandals themselves, they have brought some light into what the problems are in the Ministry of Defense, and currently parliament members are trying to find ways to solve those issues, like, for example, how to promote businesses to sell various things to the Ministry of Defense, to increase competition among the firms and to lower the prices, etc., etc. So I think, and also the minister now has two deputies, which are highly regarded as very professional people.
Appointed after the scandal.
Exactly. Yeah. And we are quite optimistic to see what they can do together in order to shed the light on what is happening and how they can reform the ministry so that we can get a better army within this.
But despite this wide public discussion, the minister stayed. So do you know why president took such decision? Because it was talks that Budano, head of military intelligence, should head the ministry. What had happened?
Because that's a good question. It's not really my expertise because I'm not appointing ministers and I don't know who appoints them, etc. But I think there is two main issues why this happened the way it did. First of all, within the corruption scandals that happened inside the minister himself wasn't indicated in any one of them, nor right now he's a person of interest of any investigations. And you have to understand that Ministry of Defense...
You don't have direct proofs that Reznikov involved in...
Exactly. Well, of course, if we did, he would have resigned straight away. That's obviously that. And so you have to understand that Ministry of Defense is huge, is enormous, and if there are some problems within... I think the issue is not how many people work there, but how much money is spent in there. And so Ministry of Defense is buying essentially things for 1 million people who work in the army. So it's not a question of how many people work in the ministry, it's a question of how many resources they use in order to provide for the army, which is insane in terms of size. So the point number one is that the minister himself, at least in what we see right now within those scandals that happened, is not implemented or connected to any of the scandals. That's point number one. Point number two is his relationships with the Western counterparts, such as Secretary of Defense of the United States, etc., etc. And I would say that changing the person who is heading the negotiations for the arms supplies to Ukraine would negatively impact those negotiations, because he has personal relationships with those people, with Lloyd Austin, for example, the Secretary of Defense of the United States. I think that changing him right now would be a mistake. And I think that's why the president eventually didn't make any changes to the cabinet of ministers, because A, he wasn't directly involved in anything, and B, he's good at what he does, which is negotiating armed deliveries to Ukraine.
Okay, but what about the funds that Ministry of Defense actually using? Is it Western funds or is Ukrainian taxpayers?
So the Western governments can't directly pay for our war. So 100% of what our Ministry of Defense spends is Ukrainian taxpayer money. So the financial aid that we get from our Western partners is used to finance non-military expenditures of Ukrainian budget. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's the answer to that question.
Okay, so is there any risk for Western weapons to be stolen in Ukraine, in your opinion?
That's a good question. So every single country that supplies Ukraine with various weapons, they have a special person working in the government that is tasked with overseeing how those weapons are used. So, for example, we have a person like that from United States, from the Pentagon, and he's working in Ukraine, and he literally has the right to demand to show him where all the United States weapons are, and we literally have to take him physically, if he wants, and show him, look, this is like the gun number 1, gun number 2, gun number 3, and he sees everything. He has a right to demand those answers from us. So if there is a problem, he will basically call his boss back in Washington and say that, I don't have full information. But at least for now, we have not a single incident where any government from the West said that they are not sure how their weapons are being used on the battlefield. That's point number 1. Point number 2, if you look at the head of Pentagon press conference, where General Milley said that Ukrainian army in 2022 basically achieved maximum results. So it wasn't possible to get anything done more with what we had. So that's his words, not mine. So, and if you assume that there is a credible threat that we are, selling weapons somewhere on the black market or whatever, how then we can achieve such a great success on the military? By the words of the head of Pentagon. So I don't believe in that, not just because I believe in my army and the results that we get on the battlefield, but also because all the Western governments have their people here that have access to all the information. They can check whatever they want concerning to the weapons they supply to us.
Brilliant. But what about the recent discussions about investigations on technocrats that have been officials in, I think, since 2014?
Yeah.
It's Kobolev, Pivovarsky that has been achieved some results in reforming.
Yeah.
At least I think Pivovarsky and Kobolev, I think he won case
against Gazprom. Yeah, exactly.
What about these suspicions that NABU issued regarding those officials? Its critics say that these cases jeopardize corporate governance reform and also anti-corruption infrastructure at all. So, what can you say about it?
Indeed, I would like our law enforcement agencies, like, for example, NABU, the one that we are overseeing, to be perfect, but unfortunately they're not. And so those two particular cases, the case against Kobolev on the bonuses they got from the Stockholm arbitrage, and the case against Pivovarsky on deregulation reforms that he implemented, we have questions as well. We think that law enforcement agencies are wrong in the way they look at the law. So in case of Kobolev, they say that there was damage done to the Ukrainian budget. But if you look at what they did, after defeating Gazprom in Stockholm arbitrage, they actually brought 4.6 billion USD into Ukraine. So no matter how you look at this, this is not a deficit of Ukrainian budget nor harm done to Ukrainian budget. It's actually in reverse. So we have brought, that team has brought a lot of money to Ukraine and a lot of respect from the European Union, because we have defeated, one of the largest oil and gas companies in the world. So we said that we're actually stronger than them. So I think that's by itself just says that, a person like that saying that he is a corrupt person is kind of weird. So we think that law enforcement agencies are basically like making a mistake. And in Pivovarsky's case, the deregulation itself, you have to look at the complex effects on economy when you deregulate something. If deregulation leads to more business being done, and so your country is making more money than it used to, then it's actually a good case of deregulation. But you have to understand that when you deregulate something, it is expected that the next year, if you look just on a specific revenue stream of the government that's been deregulated, you will probably earn less money than the year before. It doesn't mean that the regulation is wrong, because normally what happens is you have more business being done, and you get more tax revenues, etc., etc. So overall, the net benefit is higher than before the deregulation. So we just think that law enforcement agencies look at the law very specifically without understanding the bigger picture, what is happening to the economy when you do this. And actually, our Western partners and IMF were asking for deregulation in that particular case. We think that these cases are weak, and our law enforcement agencies are not ideal, and they make mistakes. So this is a mistake from my point of view.
But maybe there are some success stories as well.
Sure, absolutely. So we shouldn't concentrate just on these two cases and say that, NABU doesn't know what to do. NABU has done a lot of tremendous work. We finally have big cases in courts on some, top guys in Ukraine that would never ever even dream of having problems with law enforcement agencies. I give you a couple examples. So first of all, this is the Mikitas, which is he's a famous real estate entrepreneur, you would say. So he used to bribe local officials to get land in order to build large projects. He was actually caught bribing the mayor of Dnieper. This was second time he's done it. It's very funny. So he's been taken right on the spot by law enforcement agencies, and obviously we think that he will get convicted because, he was caught right in the act. So I don't see any case how he goes away out of this. Then we have the Nasirov, who was the head of tax revenue service. Again, people with such a high position normally never ever had problems with law enforcement agencies because they could, buy themselves out of the trouble, etc., etc. He's in jail now, and he's awaiting for the results of the court hearings. And, we are also quite sure that he's going to go to jail. Not only that, we have members of parliament of the previous president, this president, all of them actually. So last week, I think, the member of the president's party, Sluga Narodu, he was convicted on trying to bribe a police officer. He was caught on camera doing that. That's why he said that, yes, I tried to do this in court. And so he is not a member of parliament now. Again, people like that usually would never have problems with law enforcement agencies. But right now, because we have reformed our law enforcement agencies, he's no longer a parliament member. So I think it's a progress. So we finally have people who are very rich and very powerful who are now being convicted. And yes, it takes time, especially if we go into the finance cases that just takes years in order to process. Unfortunately, it takes time, but we will get, as time goes by, we will get more and more convictions in the courts, and this is the results of the reforms of the anti-corruption bureau.
But at the moment, as far as I know, a competition going for the NABU's head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Corruption agencies.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what is going on, and when do we have a new anti-corruption agencies head?
Director, yeah. The competition for the for who is going to head the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine started like a few months ago. So they have started with some basic exams to weed out the weak. So, and then they had 22 applicants left out of, I think it was like almost 100 or several dozens, quite a lot of people actually. These 22 then went into a series of interviews, and now we have 11 finalists, among which 3 will be chosen and presented to the Cabinet of Ministers, who will appoint one of them as the director of NABU.
But what about commission? Is the process transparent?
Yeah, it's quite transparent. For example, we see everything that they do. At least the committee is opened into receiving feedback on on any applicants that are applying for the position. One person who was like tied to the government, he was already moved out of the election process. So I think the committee is working in transparent fashion. And is trying to do its best to select the best applicant. But we have to understand that this application process is quite difficult. Some of the people that we would want to compete in this competition didn't go into it. Some did, but they were mobilized. So I would say that they couldn't compete fairly because they were basically in a war zone. And despite the fact that they could compete, obviously it brings them into a disadvantage because they are basically in the army. So, and there's one, like for example, one of my favorite candidates didn't make it to the finals because of that, because he was like basically busy. He couldn't perform to his fullest. It is definitely a huge responsibility for them. We'll see how it ends. We're definitely nearing the finish, the end part of this election process.
But what about public control? Is it weakening during wartime?
What exactly do you mean by public control?
That public activists, they're busy with the war and they don't really following public purchases, for example.
Yeah. So that definitely was a thing in the first like half of the year of the war, because everyone was busy with the war. It wasn't really possible to do any monitoring during that time. Especially lots of information was closed because it was active war zone everywhere. But I would say that right now, and the corruption scandals inside the Ministry of Defense were initiated by journalist investigations. So I would say that it is reversing right now. Definitely journalists are back in full gear, doing the investigation of what is happening inside the government, inside the president's office, and demanding reforms. So I would say that Ukrainian civil society is strong. It's doing its job. And it's also, very aggressive in terms of demanding reforms from the government. We understand that these reforms are basically our lifeline. We can't afford not to do them. And definitely civil society is, one of the loudest promoters of these reforms. And so I even think that our Western partners should engage with civil society to get them into the process of implementing those reforms, because they are definitely they are the ones that want these things to happen for sure.
My last question about tolerance to corruption. What do you think? Did it change during the war, in wartime?
Well, I would say that it's a bit universal. Definitely during the wartime, people feel much less tolerant to corruption, which is good. The other part, unfortunately, is that some people can manipulate these feelings, and create some false corruption somewhere to say like you have to fire that person because something happened there, and actually nothing happened there. So it is, it's a double-edged sword. But definitely we want to use the drive of Ukrainians of absolutely, zero tolerance to corruption right now, to try to educate them about the reforms that we want to implement in Ukraine, and to advocate for them, because those reforms are not easy to explain. And basically you need an active society to actually, to have patience to understand what they are and what the implications will be. We're going to do our best to try to push them on the agenda, and to make sure that the Zelensky and his office and his team and the cabinet of ministers will do them, because we have no other choice, right? We have to reform or die. So we're definitely the one on the front lines in this term. Well, it's our strategy for survival. We can't be like we were before. We can't operate in the same way as Yanukovych operated during 2010. So we definitely don't want that. We had an annexation of Crimea in 2014, in part because we were weak due to corruption, And now this huge war again, in part because we were weak due to the corruption. So we definitely want to eradicate this corruption out of the Ukraine once and for all.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for this interview.
No problem.
Good luck.
Thank you.